He was born in the basement of a mansion he wasn't allowed to walk through. His mother was the maid. The white family upstairs called him Basement Boy. But one night, he found a photo hidden in a forbidden room. A photo of his mother smiling like a lover next to the man who owned the house. That's when he realized. This mansion may have belonged to him all along. The basement of the Winthrop estate was cold and concrete, with a rusty pipe that leaked behind a stained curtain Ruth used as a door. This was where Micah was born, beneath chandeliers he wasn't allowed to look at, in a house where the smell of caviar never reached the servant quarters. At just 8 years old, Micah knew the rules: never enter the front of the house. Never eat food meant for the family. Never speak unless spoken to. And most importantly, never call the white children by their names. Carter was young master. Eliza, his mother, was madam. And Richard Winthrop, long dead, was sir. Ruth told Micah stories at night. But they weren't fairy tales. They were warnings. You were born here, she whispered one evening while folding sheets for rooms they'd never sleep in. But this house isn't yours. It never will be. People like us, we survive in the cracks. Still, Micah was curious. Why did Madame Eliza always flinch when he entered the room? Why did Carter shove him but never get punished? Why did the old butler, Mr. Harris, say, "You have your father's eyes," then walk away stiffly, almost scared? The questions kept growing, like weeds in his chest. One stormy night, while the family was away at the opera, Micah sneaked upstairs. The carpet felt wrong under his feet, too soft for someone like him. He crept into the forbidden library, a room Ruth had described but never entered. Books towered over him like silent judges. The room was thick with cigar smoke and secrets. Then, he saw it, a dusty photo in a golden frame. 2 people, smiling. A young Ruth, and Richard Winthrop. His arm was around her waist. His face soft, her eyes glowing. They looked like lovers. Not master and maid. Micah's mouth went dry. His stomach turned with a feeling too big for his body. That night, he asked his mother the question that changed everything. "Did you love him?" Ruth froze. Her hands trembled over a steaming pot of rice. She turned slowly and said, "Go to bed, Micah." "But I said go to bed." Micah didn't sleep that night. He stared at the cracked ceiling, heart pounding. The house was full of ghosts, and one of them might be his father. What if everything they told him was a lie? What if he didn't belong in the basement, but the mansion itself? Micah made a vow that night: he would uncover every secret this house tried to bury. The next morning, Ruth avoided Micah's eyes like he'd broken something sacred. She moved like a ghost through the kitchen, stirring oatmeal no one would eat, folding towels already folded. Micah sat on a crate near the back door, watching her quietly, waiting for her to speak. But the silence was heavier than usual, like it knew a storm was coming. Carter burst into the kitchen yelling for juice. He kicked over Micah's crate without a glance. Ruth handed him a glass with her eyes low. The boy took a loud gulp, wiped his mouth on his sleeve, and sneered at Micah. "What's wrong, basement boy? You see a rat down there that looks like you?" Micah clenched his fists but said nothing. Ruth had taught him silence was safer than pride. That evening, he slipped back into the library. He needed more. More proof. More answers. The photo had unlocked something, and it was eating at him from the inside. He tiptoed past the long shelves to the desk in the corner, the one with the brass drawer handles that gleamed even in the dark. The bottom drawer was locked. But the key, he remembered, hung from the butler's belt during cleaning hours. Micah had watched Mr. Harris open it before. Always gently. Always with a sigh. The next day, while Ruth scrubbed the marble floor, Micah bumped into Mr. Harris in the hallway and palmed the key. His heart thudded so loudly he thought everyone could hear it. That night, he returned. The drawer creaked open, and inside was an old leather-bound ledger. Micah turned its brittle pages with shaking hands. At first, it looked like numbers. Property records. Land titles. Transactions. Then his eyes caught a name written over and over. Ruth B. Johnson. Followed by strange words. Confidential fund, transfer pending, non-disclosure. And then one phrase underlined twice in red ink, property to pass to firstborn male, unacknowledged in writing but advised verbally. Honor this in the event of my death. Micah's eyes widened. He flipped back. The document was dated 6 months before Richard Winthrop's death. They were lovers. She was his secret. And Micah might have been his son. Micah heard footsteps in the hallway and shoved the ledger back into the drawer, relocking it just in time. His hands were slick with sweat. He slipped out of the room and down the stairs, lungs burning, heart racing. Back in the basement, he couldn't sit still. The mansion felt like a lie wrapped in gold wallpaper. He stared at the ceiling and whispered into the dark, if this is mine, why am I sleeping on concrete? The world above him had cheated him out of something, maybe everything. But one thing was certain, the truth was no longer hiding. It was fighting to be known. And he would not run from it. The estate sparkled that night. Golden lights wrapped every pillar, violins played near the fountain, and a sea of silk gowns swept across the marble floor. The Winthrops were throwing their annual charity gala, and the mansion had never looked so expensive. But Micah didn't feel like he belonged in any of it. He stood near the kitchen doors in a pressed white shirt too big for him, holding a silver tray of shrimp skewers. One of the other maids pinned a fake smile on his face. Keep your eyes down and your mouth shut. This crowd's allergic to the truth. Micah peeked into the ballroom. Carter was twirling in a tuxedo, laughing with a group of kids near the fireplace. Madame Eliza stood at the top of the stairs, her chin high, accepting praise like it was air. Guests clinked champagne glasses and passed donation envelopes like currency of the elite. Micah stepped onto the floor. A woman in diamonds plucked a skewer off his tray without looking at him. A man chuckled, cute of the Winthrops to let the staff breed here. Someone else murmured, that's Ruth's boy, right? He's got those eyes. Like Richard's. Micah's hands started to tremble. He moved faster, trying to disappear in plain sight. Then came the moment. Carter, now nearly 10, spotted him from across the room. Well, he said, grabbing a glass of red punch. Look who thinks he's people tonight. Micah stood still. Carter walked up slowly, a crooked grin on his face. Tell me something, basement boy, when you dream, do you imagine you're not dirt? Before Micah could answer, Carter threw the punch in his face. Gasps scattered across the room. Laughter followed quickly from Carter's little circle. Micah's white shirt clung to his chest. His face burned from more than the sting. Madame Eliza narrowed her eyes from the stairs but didn't move. Ruth, from across the hall, covered her mouth and stepped back into the kitchen. No one defended him. The violinists played louder to cover the shame. Micah didn't cry. He stood still, fists clenched at his sides, heart pounding with rage he didn't know he had. That night, he sat on the edge of his mattress in the basement, soaked and shivering, staring at the wall. They wanted him to believe he'd never be more than a shadow. A background. A servant. But they didn't know what he had seen. What he had read. What he now knew. Micah whispered to himself, slowly and coldly, one day. I'll buy this house. And when I do, they'll hand me the keys while I stand in their doorway. He didn't know how. He didn't know when. But in that moment, a poor black boy with nothing declared war on everything this mansion stood for. Micah left the Winthrop mansion the night he turned 15. He packed nothing, just a ripped hoodie, the name of a distant cousin scribbled on a napkin, and a secret lodged deep in his chest. Ruth had begged him not to go, sobbing as he crept out the back gate. "You don't know what's out there, baby," she whispered. "At least here. I can protect you." Micah had looked at her with eyes older than his years. "Nobody protected me here, Mama." He walked for miles that night. Slept under bridges. Ate from church donation bins. But the hunger in his stomach was nothing compared to the fire in his mind. Every day, he wrote in a notebook he found in a trash can behind a school. Ideas. Numbers. Real estate laws. Names of neighborhoods. He hung around libraries and listened through cracked doors to lectures he couldn't afford. At 17, he was cleaning floors at a tutoring center when an old math professor noticed the equations Micah had scribbled on a napkin. "Who taught you this?" "No one," Micah replied, shrugging. That professor changed everything. He paid for Micah's prep classes. Helped him apply for scholarships. Gave him a shot. By 18, Micah was accepted into a top business school. The first time he saw the campus library, he stood at the door and smiled to himself. "No one's locking this one," he whispered. In class, he didn't just study. He absorbed. He listened. He noticed how the rich thought, how they moved, talked, covered lies with smiles. He paid attention to how money wasn't earned, it was leveraged. How property became power. How silence bought time. He wasn't just learning business, he was learning war. By 23, Micah had already flipped 3 rundown properties in neglected black neighborhoods. He bought low, rebuilt with local workers, and sold high. Not for greed. For purpose. Each deed he signed felt like another step toward the mansion that once spit him out. By 25, he wore tailored suits, ran his own firm, and had clients who once wouldn't have looked him in the eye. They called him Sir now. They didn't know his story. Didn't recognize the boy who once cleaned their silverware barefoot. But Micah never forgot. He kept the old ledger locked in a glass case in his office. He read it every year on his birthday like scripture. Then, one morning, while sipping coffee in his penthouse, he scrolled through a real estate listing and froze. Winthrop Manor. For sale. Foreclosure. The family was broke. Micah set the coffee down, heart silent as a loaded gun. The house that had buried his blood and stolen his birthright, was now up for grabs. Micah didn't schedule a showing. He didn't need to. He knew every inch of that house, every crack in the floor, every whisper in the walls. Instead, he had his firm quietly by the estate through a shell corporation. The Winthrops, drowning in unpaid taxes and scandal, were desperate to sell. They didn't know who the buyer was. They didn't care. As long as the check cleared, the past could stay buried. 3 weeks later, Micah arrived unannounced. The gates still squeaked when they opened, but the garden was overgrown, and the fountain was dry. The mansion stood proudly, but it looked tired now. Faded. Like its soul had left with the chandeliers. Micah stepped out of a black SUV, tailored charcoal suit hugging his frame, leather shoes tapping against the old stone driveway. A younger real estate agent, nervous, overeager, waited near the front door with a clipboard. Good morning, sir. You must be Mr. Thompson." Micah gave a slow nod. "Yes. I believe the owners are inside." The agent smiled awkwardly. They insisted on handing the keys over personally. Inside the foyer, everything looked the same, yet smaller now. Micah's eyes scanned the staircase where he once scrubbed gum off the railing. The chandelier he used to clean with a mop and fear. The parlor where he once served drinks he wasn't allowed to sip. Then he saw them. Madame Eliza, now older but still wrapped in pearls like armor. Carter, in his 30s now, stood beside her, thinner, bitter, his jaw tight with the shame of failure. A fall from power wears louder than riches ever do. "You're the buyer," Eliza said, her voice cracking as she stepped forward. Micah didn't answer right away. He walked slowly, letting his footsteps echo. He stopped at the bottom of the staircase, facing them. "Yes," he said. "I've come to claim what should have been mine a long time ago." Eliza blinked, confused. Carter's eyes narrowed. "Do we know you?" Micah's gaze didn't waver. "You do. You just never looked at me long enough to remember." He held out his hand. "Keys, please." Eliza hesitated, her fingers trembling as she reached into her purse. When she dropped the keys into Micah's palm, the metal clicked like a final door shutting. For a moment, the house went silent. Micah looked around and whispered, "I'm home." Eliza flinched. Carter turned pale. "You don't belong here," Carter said through gritted teeth. Micah stepped closer. "I was born here. You just didn't know you were building a throne beneath your feet." He turned without another word and walked into the library. The moment his shoes touched the old rug, he felt it, like his childhood had come full circle. But this time, he was holding the power. Micah spent his first night back in the mansion alone. No staff. No decorators. No noise. He walked from room to room, letting his fingers trace old memories in the walls. The air still smelled of polish and secrets. The kitchen was silent now. No Ruth humming over a pot. No Carter mocking him from the stairs. Just silence, and the echo of a child who once wondered if he mattered. In the master bedroom, Micah found himself staring at the old mirror above the dresser. His reflection looked foreign. Same eyes, sharper suit. Same skin, stronger frame. But behind it all, the same wound. He opened the closet. It still held Richard Winthrop's monogrammed suits, pressed and hanging like ghosts waiting for a body. In the drawer, a gold pocket watch ticked. The second hand moved like it hadn't skipped a beat since the day Richard died. Micah closed the drawer softly. He didn't want his rage tonight. He wanted the truth. In the study, he lit the fireplace with the flick of a match. The flames danced over the dusty books, just like they had the night he first found that photo. He pulled the ledger from his bag and placed it on the desk. One page caught his eye, something he hadn't fully processed before. A handwritten note in the margin, different from the others. "If anything happens to me, tell Ruth to take what's hers. Micah will understand when the time comes. R.W." His breath caught. The paper trembled under his fingers. There was never a mistake. Richard had known. Maybe even loved him. But no one told Ruth. No one gave her that power. They buried it, buried her. Micah sat down in the old leather chair and stared into the fire. The boy who once slept on concrete had come full circle. The house that tried to erase him had become his. The same marble floors that saw him shamed now echoed his footsteps in silence. The same chandelier he once cleaned reflected only him now. He didn't celebrate. He didn't cry. He just listened, to the quiet. To the house that once rejected him. And it listened back. The next morning, Micah opened the windows. Sunlight poured into rooms that hadn't seen it in years. He walked barefoot across the cold floors, like he once did as a child, but this time with pride. The past hadn't left scars. It had left a blueprint. And Micah was ready to build something no one could tear down. Micah began renovating the house the following week, not just with bricks and paint, but with truth. He ripped out the old portraits of the Winthrops that lined the hallway, replacing them with community art from local black youth. He invited young architecture students from underfunded neighborhoods to walk the grounds, study the estate, and dream. For the first time in its history, the mansion opened its doors to voices it once silenced. But not everyone applauded. Whispers filled the town. "He's desecrating a legacy," one man spat in the grocery line. "He's just a squatter in a suit," muttered another. The Winthrop name still held weight, and to some, Micah was still an intruder, no matter how legal his claim. One evening, Micah found himself in the attic, dusty, wooden, forgotten. He wasn't looking for anything in particular. Just chasing ghosts again. The air was dry, and the floor creaked with every step. In the corner, buried under a moth-eaten tarp, he found an old trunk, its latch rusted, its wood swollen from decades of silence. Inside were stacks of letters. Most were formal, estate business, cold and stiff. But one envelope stood out. It was addressed to Ruth. The handwriting was messy. Rushed. Familiar. Micah opened it gently, the paper fragile with time. Ruth, I'm sorry. Eliza knows. She found out everything. I tried to tell her I'd leave her, but she threatened you. Said she'd ruin you. Said no one would ever believe the boy was mine. I told Harris to hide the documents in the ledger, he's the only one I trust. I'm scared. If something happens to me, don't fight them. Protect Micah. That's all that matters. Forgive me. Richard. Micah sank to the attic floor, letter shaking in his hand. So it was true. Everything. Eliza had known. She had covered it up. She had stolen not just money, but a life, a family, a name. Micah sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the words. He imagined Ruth, walking through this house all those years with her back bent and voice low, never knowing this letter was hidden just above her head. And then he made a decision. He would make the truth public. All of it. Not out of revenge, but out of love. Ruth deserved the world to know what was taken from her. What she survived. And what her son reclaimed. He climbed down from the attic as if carrying fire. Micah wasn't just reclaiming property. He was restoring a legacy that someone tried to erase with fear. And this time, the world would hear it. The morning the letter went public, everything changed. Micah didn't release it through tabloids or scandal-hungry blogs. He hosted a press conference, right in the front yard of the mansion that had once tried to bury him. Cameras flashed. Reporters gathered. Even former staff from the estate came to watch, standing in silence as he stepped up to the microphone. He told the truth, not with anger, but with precision. He read Richard Winthrop's letter aloud. Told them about the attic. The cover-up. The buried will. The unacknowledged son. His mother's life of silence. The humiliation. The inheritance no one dared mention. And when he finished, he said, "This house didn't make me. It tried to break me. But every wall they built to keep me out, I've now walked through." The footage went viral within hours. Support poured in online. Millions viewed the clip, shared hashtags like #LegacyStolen and #MicahWins. Influencers, historians, and news anchors praised him for reclaiming stolen history. But in town, it was a different story. The Winthrops had long been the town's royalty. Their name funded libraries, parades, plaques. To the old guard, Micah's rise was a threat, not a triumph. By noon, someone spray-painted "thief" across the front gate. The next day, a window was shattered. The day after that, a fire was set in the garden, extinguished before it could spread. Micah watched it all with eerie calm. Truth offends those who live in lies, he told his team. Let them be loud. I'll be louder with action. Still, it hurt. It brought back every moment in that house when he had been told to keep his head down. Every slap Carter gave him. Every stare from Madame Eliza that said, "You don't belong here." Now he did. And they hated it. He drove through the town that week in silence, remembering each corner where he'd once carried groceries barefoot. He saw the bakery that used to shoo him away. The school that ignored his scholarship letters. When he returned to the mansion, a small group of protesters had gathered near the gate. One sign read, "You'll never be a Winthrop." Micah looked at it, smiled faintly, and walked inside. He didn't need to be a Winthrop. He had already become something greater. Not an heir, but a builder. And builders don't ask permission to lay bricks on stolen land. They just rebuild the world that was denied to them. 3 days after the press conference, Micah received a call from a private number. The voice on the other end was soft, weathered. "I saw you on television," she said. "You sound like him." Micah froze. "Who is this?" he asked gently. A long pause. Then, "I used to be Ruth's friend. Long ago, when she first started working for the Winthrops." Micah sat down. The woman, her name was Alma, invited him to visit her in a small care home just outside the city. He didn't hesitate. When he arrived, she sat in a sunlit corner by the window, her silver hair tied in a neat braid, hands trembling over a photo album. When she looked at him, her eyes filled with tears. "You got her eyes," she said. "And his walk. Just like Richard's." Micah sat beside her in silence. Alma turned the album toward him. Inside were pictures he'd never seen, Ruth in her youth, smiling on a picnic blanket. Richard beside her, out of his stiff suit, barefoot in the grass, holding her hand like it was the only truth he ever knew. They were in love, Alma said. Not a fling. Not a mistake. He wanted to marry her, you know. Said he didn't care what Eliza or the town thought. But that house, that family, they weren't ready to let go of their power. Micah blinked back the heat in his eyes. "She never told me any of this." "Because she was protecting you," Alma said. "All those years, she carried shame that wasn't hers. And she made sure you never had to." Alma reached into a drawer and pulled out a small, wrapped bundle. "She gave me this before she died. Told me not to open it unless something changed." Micah unwrapped it slowly. Inside was a locket. Gold. Old. Worn. It opened with a soft click. On one side, a photo of Ruth. On the other, a baby, him. On the back was engraved, "To my son. The house may forget you. But I never will." His hands trembled. For the first time since reclaiming the mansion, Micah let himself cry. Not out of grief. But out of love. Out of the unbearable beauty of a woman who gave everything to shield him from the very weight he now stood on top of. He held the locket to his chest. "I'm going to rename the house," he said softly. "It won't carry their name anymore." Alma smiled. "What will you call it?" He looked out the window, where the sun painted the trees in gold. "Ruth House," he whispered. "It belongs to her now." The first time Micah spoke the new name aloud, Ruth House, it echoed through the marble halls like a prayer returned. Every sign on the property changed. The gold plaque at the gate now bore her name. The newsletters. The online listing. The foundation registration. All of it carried Ruth's legacy forward. Some called it radical. Others, disrespectful. But to those who mattered, those who remembered her working 2 jobs and smiling through pain, it was justice, long delayed but finally delivered. The community responded with a flood of emotion. Former maids, butlers, drivers, cooks, many now elderly, came to visit. They stood on the front steps and cried. One woman whispered, "She was the reason we made it through." Micah opened the mansion for weekly public tours, not to show off wealth, but to share stories. Each room held photos of Ruth's life, her favorite recipe handwritten in the kitchen, a small Bible from her nightstand in the library, her laughter frozen in black and white pictures lining the ballroom walls. And in the center hall, Micah placed the locket in a glass case, forever lit, always seen. He didn't just restore the home. He redefined it. But not everyone showed up. Carter never returned. After the sale, he fled to another state, embarrassed, bitter, bankrupt. He gave no interviews. left no statements. His silence was loud, but Micah no longer needed his apology. Madame Eliza, on the other hand, did return. She came quietly one morning, escorted by a nurse, her steps slower now. Time had thinned her pride. She asked to walk through the house alone. Micah allowed it. He watched her from the window as she wandered through her former empire, now renamed for the woman she had tried to erase. Her shoulders sagged as she passed Ruth's photo in the dining hall. Her lips trembled near the glass case holding the locket. Finally, she reached the front door again. Micah opened it for her. They stood face to face. "I knew," she said, voice thin like paper. "I knew everything. I just didn't want to believe a woman like her could take something that belonged to me." Micah said nothing. Eliza looked at him, tears forming but unfallen. "I lost this house. But I never realized until now. I never owned it. I just held it hostage." She walked away without another word. Micah closed the door slowly behind her. That evening, he stood in the hallway, alone with the silence again. But this time, it didn't feel empty. It felt full. Full of her. Full of truth. Full of something that could finally breathe. 1 year later, Ruth House was no longer just a mansion. It was a sanctuary. Every wing had been repurposed. The East Hall became a literacy center for underprivileged youth. The former dining room was now a scholarship office. Micah renamed the old ballroom, the gathering room, where families held reunions, birthdays, and weddings, free of charge. People who had never imagined themselves inside such walls now walked them proudly. And on the first anniversary of its rebirth, hundreds gathered on the lawn beneath the wide oak trees. Children played tag on the grass where Micah had once served hors d'oeuvres barefoot. Elderly guests in folding chairs clutched programs that read, From Silence to Sovereignty, the Ruth House Story. Micah stood at the front steps, holding the microphone in both hands. He looked out over the crowd and took a breath. "When I was a boy," he began, "I slept on concrete under this house. I used to stare at the ceiling and wonder if anyone even knew I existed." He paused, scanning the faces before him, black, white, young, old, hopeful. "I know now that someone always did. My mother." Applause rippled through the yard. She carried dignity in her spine and swallowed injustice without ever asking for a receipt. "She knew the house wasn't hers, but she made it a home for me anyway." He pointed to the gold plaque over the door. "She deserves to be remembered not as a maid, but as a mother, a survivor, and a queen who never wore her crown because the world wouldn't hand it to her. So I built it instead." Silence fell like reverence. Then, a choir began singing, soft and soulful. The same hymn Ruth used to hum when folding linens at night, "His eye is on the sparrow." Micah closed his eyes. In that moment, he didn't see chandeliers or gold railings. He saw Ruth, standing barefoot on polished marble, smiling gently as if to say, "You did it." Later that night, he sat alone in the library, the fire glowing, the ledger open beside him, not because he needed it anymore, but because it reminded him of how far he'd come. He turned to a fresh page. Wrote one sentence. "Legacy is not about blood or bricks. It's about what you build in the silence others tried to leave you in." He closed the book and leaned back in the chair that once belonged to Richard Winthrop. And for the first time in his life, Micah felt whole.